August 1794. As Vice President John Adams briskly walked to the president's quarters, he could feel a mixture of fear, panic, and utter exhaustion wash over him. For the past 3 years, the people of Western Pennsylvania had been revolting, rebelling, and refusing the country's first tax imposed on domestic goods. The Revolutionary War had devastated the new country's financial situation, and a tax on the production of whiskey had been created to help pay down the infant nation's debts. The whiskey itself was not being taxed, but rather the distilling process of all alcoholic spirits. Whiskey was currency in the American frontier. It wasn't just for drinking. Historically, whiskey had been used in everything, from medicine to perfumes, and was the way of preserving excess wheat, barley, rye, and corn. It was a transactional good, and the farmers who were producing it were not fond of the idea of a tax that they had no say in. The core of the American Revolution was the motto, no taxation without representation. Many of these farmers had fought in the American War of Independence and thought that their new president was up to their old king's tricks. For 3 years, the people of Western Pennsylvania had been violently opposing the tax. 8 months after the tax's inception, on September 6, 1791, a group of angry farmers abducted a tax collector by the name of Robert Johnson. Johnson was out on his rounds attempting to collect back taxes when a gang of men dressed as women pulled him from his horse, dragged him into the nearby woods, doused him in hot tar, and covered his body in downy white feathers. It was a horrific scene and a clear sign to President Washington that there was real civil unrest boiling over. Washington was horrified and threatened to squash the rebellion with force. Although he himself was not terribly keen on the tax either, he could not allow this dissent to grow, and the debt did need to be paid off. Yet his threats fell on deaf ears. Farmers continued to oppose the tax, and the savagery continued. On the evening of July 17, 1794, the barbarity had reached a deadly crescendo. Alongside a federal marshal, John Neville, a local tax collector, had hit the town to serve a round of writs to distillers who were avoiding their whiskey tax. In response, an enraged group of over 500 men congregated at Neville's home, armed and angry. A terrified Neville picked up his own rifle and shot one of the protesters. From here, chaos befell the scene. Federal soldiers actually came to Neville's aid, but this just inflamed the situation even more. Shots were exchanged and a handful of men lost their lives. The entire event concluded with the burning of Neville's home. This was the catalyst the farmers needed to get themselves organized. They formed militias and threatened a march on Pittsburgh. Now, Vice President Adams had the true misfortune of telling President Washington that the time to act was now.
How many men do we have at our disposal?
A concerned Washington asked.
We have an assortment of 13,000, a mix of militias and federal troops.
After a long moment, Washington rose and addressed the room.
It is no secret that there is rising suspicion among the colonists that we cannot control and lead this nation. Tomorrow, we change that narrative.
The next day, along with some 13,000 men, Washington himself led the charge. This is the only time in U.S. history a sitting president took active command of troops on the battlefield. However, there would be no battle. The farmers' militias had dispersed and scattered into hiding. Washington's clear show of force quelled the rebellion and actually united the nation. This fledgling country would survive and prosper. However, the Whiskey Rebellion was a brutal, bloody, and tumultuous time that has scarred Western Pennsylvania's history forever. Hey friends, it's Becca. For the past 3 years, the West London Witch team have been dedicated to bringing you the best supernatural stories at the highest studio quality. And by team, I mean me and my buddy Danny. We do this work totally for free because we love it. We're proud of our content and appreciate the wonderful interactions we get to have with storytellers and listeners just like yourself. If you're enjoying the West London Witch, maybe consider joining our Patreon. It's a way to further engage with us and show your support for two creatives. If you're in a position to spare enough each month for us to grab a cup of coffee in between edits or add to the piggy bank for a new microphone, we would love to see you in our Patreon community. But I know times are tough, so if you're not in a position to join Patreon right now, that's okay. We aren't going anywhere. Head on over to patreon.com/The West London Witch. For as little as £1, $1, €1 a month, you can gain full access to our coven, a space where we share behind-the-scenes stories, dive deeper into each episode, answer your questions, and have special little treats to thank you for sharing your love and kindness with your favorite little witch. Hello, and welcome to the West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. You may recognize Beckie-Ann Galentine from her viral TikTok account, My Bloody Galentine. Beckie-Ann is a paranormal investigator and a haunted oddities collector who shares her travels, finds, and paranormal experiences on her My Bloody Galentine TikTok and Instagram. However, today Beckie-Ann shares with us a story that you haven't seen on her accounts. A case that is the subject of a soon-to-be-released documentary featuring Beckie-Ann. But here on the West London Witch is the first time Beckie-Ann has shared the entire story in full. What you will hear here today goes above and beyond anything the documentary captured. So pour yourself a double shot of your favorite American whiskey and prepare yourself for a wild journey of history, haunts, and spirits of all kinds. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is the West London Witch, Episode 71, The Spirit of the Whisky Rebellion.
Recently, in the earliest portion of the year, I was scheduled to film a paranormal documentary with myself and a few of my closest friends in the field. We were filming at a location that had never been investigated by paranormal investigators before, known as the Black Horse Tavern. The Black Horse Tavern, the foundation below it is nearly 300 years old. It was the first and last meeting site of the Whisky Rebellion in the area. You can imagine these meetings would be very heated. These people felt like the government that had set out to protect them had turned their backs on them.
There were two sides of the Whisky Rebellion. Those who accepted or understood the tax set out by Alexander Hamilton, and those who agreed with Thomas Jefferson that now was not the time or place for this type of levy. Heated meetings and debates took place on the site of the Black Horse Tavern. No one wanted to admit that they might agree or be compliant with the tax, as that enraged the other side of the panel. It was a fraught and contentious time, and the Black Horse Tavern would have seen a lot of outrage, discussion, opposition, and dissent.
When I was first offered to investigate this location, I assumed that the owner was just interested in getting attention on her historic property. She had said it's haunted, and, I believed her, but I thought she meant like a little old lady in the attic or something that was benign, maybe residual energy. I didn't realize when we started investigating that I was going to have the strangest weekend in my entire life. When we get to the location, we are kind of taken aback by how unassuming it is. It's designed with Versace wallpaper. They have events there where people have dinners, and it just has become kind of a community staple. But what you notice among all the beautiful decor is that cobwebs have started to form in between the staircase spindles, and it's been untouched for relatively quite some time.
Bree, the owner of the property, came in and began to tell the investigators and the documentary crew a little more about the site and her experiences there.
She shares that she doesn't even like to be there. And I'm thinking, what a dissonance. She invited me to this cute historic place with a benign haunting. And now she's saying that one night they were having a historical reenactment and all of the lights went out and the candles blew out when they said it's time to leave. And they're saying that these paintings, if you separate them, they cause the lights in the hallway to explode. And all of this activity that seems far more serious than what I had known her to talk about. And she said for a long time she had kept it in. And I remember confronting her and I said, Bree, what is going on?
It had become apparent to Beckie-Ann that there was a lot more to this case than she or the team had originally thought. And things only got stranger as Bree took the team on a tour of the home. As she pointed out architectural facets, distinguishing features, and spoke to the history of the site, she abruptly stopped the tour as she made a startling discovery. While showing the group a specific door in the house, she reached up to touch the top of the door frame. As her fingers dusted the corner of the molding, she came upon a skeleton key, an original from when the property was built. That part of the property had not been redecorated, so it's possible Bree was the first person to touch that key for 100 years.
The irony of her finding a skeleton key didn't come into play until we ended up leaving after several days in the town. Now, this town, Brownsville, Pennsylvania, it's set on an old sandstone fort. It was indigenous land that was stolen. There's a lot of energy between the battles that had come through there, the rivers. It used to be 3 towns and it's divided by a river. So you have this constant flow of water. It is a place that has been essentially abandoned by the government, people who care about the citizens there. A lot of people there are in disparity. So, you have to think about the energy. It's almost as if these people have faced oppression and their ancestors that were there before them have faced oppression. And there's just a lot of negativity in this area. After Bree finds the skeleton key, I thought, that's cute and weird. Like, I like that. That's exciting. But I didn't think things would continue to ramp up so quickly.
High strangeness began to befall the team. The psychic medium the group had brought with them refused to stay in the home. He was totally psychically overwhelmed. The property felt like a live wire that was constantly pulsing through him. An omen, perhaps, as this was just the first incident in a long string of eerie activity.
Within several hours, Viva, one of the investigators, went upstairs to use the restroom and the water started running black. Chris, almost simultaneously, one of our videographers, came downstairs and I noticed a 3-inch scratch from his ear to his neck. And I said, Chris, you got scratched. He's a skeptic. I said, no, Chris, that's a single file scratch for several inches down your neck. And he said, don't document this. I'm like, okay, we don't have to document this or the water running black. We don't want to fear monger. I never go in that direction on my investigations. Things are usually these sweet human interactions with these spirits. So when things started to feel discordant and chaotic, I personally was questioning what is going on.
Beckie-Ann was concerned for her team. They had already lost the medium. Black water was oozing from the perfectly functioning taps. And the film crew had personally been attacked. It was time for Beckie-Ann to ask Bree for a little more insight.
And she looked so serious in the face, straightforward, dead expression, and said, the house is attacking. I need to leave.
Bree ran out of the property in a fit of fear. She didn't even take her car keys. The only thing she had in her hand was the skeleton key.
As the investigation unfolded, we had a lot of strange electrical stuff. So when we were upstairs, when you enter the attic where there's allegedly this entity, your hair stands on end. So I'm taking a K2 meter and I'm noting the hot spots where there's some sort of electrical current and issue. The house is essentially vibrating this point, like there's pulsing lights. And I just say, earlier was weird, but this has to be electrical. When you go into the basement, there's an electrical breaker box and they have, the brown scapular and exorcism medallions on the breaker box.
Beckie-Ann was happy to write off the activity as an electrical issue, but the discovery of the medallions and the prayers on the breaker box made her think twice. It was clear to her that someone had attempted some sort of ritual or blessing in the basement. Perhaps the physical electrics were fine, but rather whatever was in the home was using and manipulating that energy to make themselves known.
We left the Black Horse Tavern and investigated the rest of the town throughout the course of the days. We did a general store. We did another place that was a famous astronomer's childhood home. But I ultimately felt this pull, like I needed to go back to the tavern, and I couldn't explain why. And the documentary crew was saying, no, we went to the tavern already. And I said, I have this feeling we have to go back. And I said, at first, I felt like it didn't matter. All those things were happening. The water was running black. Chris was getting scratched. They found the skeleton key, but left her keys. And I said, there was so much going on. The lights were pulsing. And I felt like it wasn't haunted and that it was all electrical fault. But now I'm noticing there's this concurrent story that's happening alongside, almost a parallel that can't be represented in REM pods and K2 meters and other paranormal equipment. It's not visible, but it's happening to all of us. It's almost as if Brownsville repeats what the people who were living there 200 years ago were doing. It's as if the house is injecting this psychic imprint of the past on the current residents.
As the investigation continued, the team was struggling, as they really weren't catching any documentable evidence that would not only be compelling for the documentary, but could also definitively prove paranormal activity.
This was the final day. The pressure was on. The story wasn't coming together. I had completely exploded on the documentary crew, and I didn't know why. I was just like, get us back to that tavern. And I said, I know this sounds weird, everybody. I get the group together. I know we're frustrated. We're all on edge. Nobody's getting along. It's been 4 tough days of filming. Let's go to the basement and embody the spirit of the Whisky Rebellion. And I advise every single person to channel whatever anger and frustration they were feeling with the production crew, each other, whatever they had going on, into almost like a role-playing of the Whisky Rebellion.
Once settled in the basement, they decided to put their plan to action. Jules, one of the investigators, went into the Estes method, and then the team began to embody the spirit of the Whisky Rebellion. However, before the experiment even began, Beckie-Ann noticed an interesting feature of the basement.
When you get to the basement, there's almost 2 areas that are distinctly separate from each other. So there's a traditional finished basement, but once you enter the second chamber of the basement, there's a strange door that is lifted above. I would almost say it's a coal cellar, but we're not quite sure. And everyone just kind of already felt weird about this door. I'm like, that's very strange. And I didn't know, nobody made me aware that it had been a known thing among the investigators to not open this door. So I'm entering the situation thinking it's just a weird door. We have one investigator under doing the Estes method, which is a rapidly scanning radio, the spirit box, while having noise-canceling headphones to remove the bias of the answers. So she's only hearing what she believes she's hearing in the headphones, and she's blindfolded. I laid a tripwire from the door to where the film crew was, and we sat facing each other. It was 2 on 3 with investigators and the film crew to the right. So she's under doing the Estes method, and we begin the investigation. We start asking questions, and we start saying, if they keep taxing us, what else are they going to tax? We can't let them get away with this. And we're all embodying this anger. And finally, she mentions the door. And I looked at the other investigator, Paulson, across from me, who's closest to the door. And I remember saying, something feels different. One of the lights on the tripwire, so it's a segmented wire of EMF, we could see blinking. And we said we felt like someone was in the room. I remember we said, she's mentioning the door, should we open it? Someone contrasts with, Seth said not to open it. I looked at Paulson and I said, open the door. And she said, yeah, let's open it. And as we open the door, that's when the energy in the room completely shifts. And Jules runs out crying.
The team ran after Jules to comfort her, but Beckie-Ann and fellow investigator Amanda Paulson remained behind with the documentary team. Amanda then took up the mantle of going under the Estes method and immediately felt that they were not alone.
Amanda felt like a man had stepped in the room. That's when I said, you know what? We're trying to make a documentary and we have all these gadgets, but the stuff in this house isn't manifesting in these gadgets. And I wanted so badly for something to happen that was tangible, that would kind of prove to the production crew even like what we're doing is real, because they're just documentary producers and convincing them isn't as easy as, someone who already believes and takes the evidence as face value. So I said, if there's someone here, now that we riled up this anger, we've opened this door, could you give us a sign that you're here? I said, maybe a knock. And you hear simultaneously, like as I say that, this loud knock and the entire tripwire lights up. And we realized, okay, we opened this door and now all of this wild activity is happening. The owner entrusted us to be the first investigators here to kind of figure out what's going on. And we figured out, yes, it's definitely haunted. It's specifically haunted down here in the basement where, again, we're the first and last meeting sites of the Whisky Rebellion. So with this history there and it being the original foundation, as the first house was raised and this other one was built up, it makes sense that it would be concentrated lower to the ground, closer to that sandstone where all that energy was. That's when we said, take a break. We're going to figure out what to do. We've opened this door. We can't in good conscience leave this place after we open that door and whatever energy. And I don't believe it was we opened a door and let something out. I think it was more of a metaphysical, we opened a door and it charged the activity. It created something. Maybe it was us putting so much intent into what opening that door meant.
Beckie-Ann and Amanda went upstairs to join the team and update them on their findings. The group were huddled together, refusing to re-enter the basement. It was up to Beckie-Ann and Amanda to close this metaphorical and metaphysical door.
And I said, what are we going to do? We can't just close the door. And I said, let's write a sigil on the door and close it. And they said, that's a good idea. Get this chalk. I grabbed the white one and I asked everyone, okay, you can't come to the basement with me, but could you at least put your intent into the chalk that we're going to seal this door? So everyone grabs the chalk, holds on to it for a moment and puts whatever intention, speaks, chants into it, whatever they felt they needed to do to be present with us without being physically present. We go into the basement and we basically said, you need to stop scaring Bree. There's no space for anything with negative energy to be contained in this basement. I was shaking. Everything was so frustrating. I was tired. It was, I want to say, close to midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And we screamed a chant over and over and again as we shut the door and drew the sigil on it. And then we closed the door.
The investigators and the film crew were in a hurry to leave the tavern. They were scared, confused, and exhausted. They concluded their exit interviews for the documentary in a hurry and then bolted from the home. Although that's the conclusion of the documentary, it's not the end of the story.
We wrap up filming, and Amanda and I had a few things that we wanted to let go of, and I said, let's walk to the river. And she said, well, we could drive. And I said, you know what? Let's just walk. It's not that cold. It'll be kind of healing for us after everything we've been through the past few days. As we're walking down, we're on a sidewalk. The river is underneath a bridge. It's the iconic view of this tiny, essentially ghost town we are investigating. And we go to throw things off the edge. And this man turns a corner and faces us head on as we're walking down the sidewalk. I thought this man was going to stab us. We had no protection on us. And he looked dead ahead, no eye contact. I think most of us know if you encounter someone on the sidewalk, you say, oops, excuse me, and kind of walk out of the way and laugh. And I said, oh, sorry. And he didn't crack a smile. He just was vacant of expression, almost as if he were a vessel for a message rather than actually being in his body. I swung off of the sidewalk to get away from him, and he passed us without ever kind of noticing us. And as he passes us, he says, did you close that door? This is a random stranger in the street. And we said, excuse me? He said, did you close that door?
The pair were in shock. Who was this strange messenger? What an odd thing to say to strangers on the road. It felt too apropos to be merely coincidental.
We went to the river and we threw what we needed to off and released everything from that town. It was just strange that we didn't have to go to the river. We could have buried what we needed to. We didn't have to walk to the river. We could have driven, but all of those choices led to someone saying, did you close that door? And for the next day or so, we felt, did we close that door? Is it truly closed? Can it even be closed? Like, has that house opened up to be a paranormal hotspot?
The team could leave Brownsville. Their time and relationship with the property had come to a close. But Bree, the property owner, did not have that luxury. Beckie-Ann went to talk to Bree and update her on all of the crew's experiences and findings. And she asked Bree, if you were so scared, if you were having so much unexplainable activity, why didn't you tell me? And what do you make of our findings?
They said, it's interesting because we didn't tell you any of this. We wanted you to have an authentic experience. But historically, there was a guy, Brackenridge, who was spearheading in the Whisky Rebellion. And he went the first day to the tavern. And when he went there to say his part, he said that Brackenridge felt like the meeting served no purpose. They didn't get to what they needed to do. And he went around town getting the rest of the stories, which is parallel to us getting the rest of the stories of the town by investigating other locations. But ultimately, Brackenridge felt like to do what he set out to accomplish, he needed to return to the tavern a second time. And I said, so I'm Brackenridge. And they're like, well, I'm just pointing out the parallel. And I really was just compelled by that because I didn't realize that for the past several days that we basically stepped into these historic shoes without knowing and operated as these parts. I did a little more digging after that, and I found out that Brackenridge attended those meetings with a man named Albert Gallatin. My last name is Galentine, but historically, 200 years ago, when we came to this country, our name was Gallatin, and then it changed to Galentine, and then it just became lost in translation. But I knew in that moment I was like, Gallatin, that's one of my ancestors. So it all just kind of lined up in the strangest way that I was there, that my ancestors were there, and that we repeated this historical, unsettling experience.
Beckie-Ann has never shared this story in its entirety before. She said that the documentary will live in its own space, a snapshot as one element of the case. But it can never truly portray all of the strange synchronicities and parallels the team experienced. Beckie-Ann truly feels as though she stepped into a historical time loop. This case was difficult, as much like the Whisky Rebellion, The team all had different ideas and opinions on how the investigation should proceed. There was infighting, frustration, and a conclusion that was not universally satisfactory. Beckie-Ann does not believe that this space can truly ever be healed. She believes the residual energy is just too strong, too angry, and too passionate to ever be pacified. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.